In this lesson, we'll learn how to work with a transform node in order to adjust the size of our car. So we're picking up right where we left off with the last lesson, and we've got a reference object here, this box that we've made, that is the exact size that we need our car to be. And if you remember when we created this box here, all we had to do was to type in the values that we needed here in this size parameter to adjust the size of the box. Let's do the same for the car. I'm going to go up one level by clicking on the OBJ here inside of the address bar. And now I'm going to dive inside of the concept car so that I can now manipulate the objects that are located inside this container. So there's the file node that actually brings in the concept car. We'll just look at all the options that we have here. And I'm not seeing the option to be able to resize, scale, rotate, to move this object in any way. So what we're going to need to do is to use the transform tool to make those adjustments. Now, to access tools in Houdini, you don't use a menu across the top here as in a lot of other pieces of software. Houdini allows you to access all of its tools using the tool menu. Now, the way that you can get there is there's several different techniques, and one of the easiest is probably just inside of the network view here in an empty space. You can right click, and that very first option is the tool menu. And you'll see here beside there that the tool menu's shortcut on the keyboard is either tab or backspace. For now, we're just going to click on the word tool menu here. Now that will bring up this set of options. Now these are the tools that are available to you in Houdini. Now, like I said, everything that you're going to do to manipulate geometry, to set up your rigid bodies, to set up fluids, for texturing, for animation, almost any of those tools that you're going to use are going to be located here inside of this tool menu. Now do notice that when we right-clicked here inside of the network view, we came over to the tool menu, but it's also labeled as the tab menu. So many people do not use this right-click method. Probably the easiest way to find something inside of Houdini is to use tab. And the reason for that is because you can hit tab on the keyboard from here inside of the network view or from over here inside of the scene view. In fact, you can access the tab menu from almost anywhere inside of Houdini, no matter where your mouse is, by using the tab shortcut key. Now we want to be able to use a transform tool. So in order to get there, we're going to right-click and go to manipulate. So tool menu here. And now out of the list of options here, we want to be in manipulate. And then out of the options inside of the manipulate window here, we want to choose transform. Now we click on the word transform. And here inside of the network view, I get this little dotted outline of a box. All I have to do is click anywhere inside of this network view, and it will lay down that new transform tool. Now, these little boxes that you see inside of the network view are also referred to as nodes. So you are probably going to hear multiple times me and other instructors and other people refer to these as nodes or tools. The term is sort of simultaneous. So I could have said we need to lay down a transform node, or we need to use the transform tool. Either way would have meant the same thing, that we need to go to the tool menu and use the transform option here. Now, if you need to remove a node from your node network, all you have to do is select it and tap delete. Now, we want to use that transform. I just wanted to show you a different way of getting to it. Now, you may remember that to get there, we had to right-click, go to the tool menu. From the tool menu, choose manipulate, and from the manipulate list, choose transform. That's a lot to remember. In fact, there's a very limited amount of nodes that you'll be working with very frequently. You're not going to work with every single node all the time. So memorizing the path to particular nodes can get very complex. Houdini, however, offers you the ability to filter through the tool menu just by typing in what it is that you're looking for. So follow along with me here. I'm just going to type tab, and then without touching any other button or the mouse, I'm just going to type T, R, A, And you can see right there, the third one from the list is transform. All I had to do was start typing in the word transform, and Houdini filtered through every single node that was available to me to find the right node that I was looking for. And I didn't have to remember exactly how I got there, like if it was tool menu, polygon, and then in polygon, if it was in here, or which one of these it was in. It's just very simply, all you have to do is type tab, T-R-A, and you can see right there, it's the third one from the list. So now again, we click on that node, if you will, or tool from the list. And I get my little dotted box here. I click again inside the network view, and that lays down that box. Now, in order to actually have that transform tool take effect on the geometry, I need to be able to hook those up. Now, to wire up nodes, as it's often called inside of Houdini, all you have to do is click on either the source or destination node here, and you'll get this sort of cord, and you'll see as you drag this out, and I'm not holding down any button. I just clicked once on the little nub here on the top of the node and remove my finger from the button on the mouse, and I've got this little string here, basically, dotted string. And I can plug it up to any other input or output that I want. Now, I want to plug it up here to the concept car. So I'm going to click on the little nub here at the bottom of the concept car. And as soon as I do, you can see that my dotted cord becomes a solid cord. And I now actually have wired these two nodes together. This is a cord or a wire or a connection, just depends on what you want to refer to them as, but I've connected these two nodes up now. Now, let's look at what we have as options on this transform node. I'm going to click on the node itself and make sure that it's highlighted here. So this transform node gives me the ability to translate, rotate, scale, shear, change the pivot, basically all of the things that we've been doing with our default geometry. The default geometry comes with these options built in, but when you import a piece of geometry from a disk, Houdini doesn't really know exactly what you're going to want to do with it. So we have to manually add this transform node here. So I should be able now to come in here and actually start making adjustments. Let's go ahead and scale this down a little bit. So instead of being 1 by 1 by 1, I'm going to change the scale of this to be, say, 0.25 by 0.25. Well, something's wrong here, actually. I'm making adjustments to the scale, and I've got the transform selected, but the viewport isn't changing. I'm not actually scaling down the model in any way. And that's because of where we have our display flag. Now remember earlier we talked about these flags that we have inside of the network view. And we talked about the bypass flag, and we talked about the display flag. Well, what we're seeing right now is that the viewport here is displaying just the car from the file node only. If we want to include the calculations of the transform node, we don't just select it, but we actually have to move that flag down here, and you do that just by clicking on that far right-hand flag on the node. Now, as soon as I do that, you can see that the car has started to scale down. It's now starting to include the calculations that are being made here. So you can see that the car is getting a little bit closer to where it needs to be. And we can continue to use, to type in these values until we find exactly what it is that we're looking for. So we could do 0.125 here. That'll definitely make the car skinnier this way. But we want to make sure that we're doing this in all of the directions the same amount so we don't change the actual proportions of the vehicle. So we want to make all of these 0.125, 0.125, 0.125 in X, Y, and Z. So now you can see that the car is getting much, much closer. But it's kind of a long and tedious battle to actually come in here and figure out exactly what these values are going to be, to come in and type each one of them in and type it 3 times all the way across. So I'm going to set these values back to their defaults and show you a quicker way of getting to the same solution. So to change these values back to their defaults, if you hover your mouse over the word scale, you'll see it just subtly highlight in a lighter shade of gray. If you'll right-click once you have that highlighted, and come down to about the lower third of your menu here after you right-click, you'll see the option to revert to defaults. Also take note that the keyboard shortcut for this is Control and middle mouse button. That's what MMB stands for here. So I'm just going to click on that, and it will automatically set the scale back to being 1 by 1 by 1. Now, this basically will just restore any value that you have, any parameter you can restore back to the defaults of what they were before you started messing with it, just by simply right-clicking on the name of the parameter that you want to change and coming down to Revert to Defaults. If you do like I did in this case and right-click and go to Revert to Defaults, but it's grayed out and not an option, that means that the value of the parameter is already at its natural defaults. So we talked about how we had to change all three variables when we're trying to scale something so we don't lose the proportions of the vehicle. Well, Houdini gives us another way of doing it with this button and this parameter here called Uniform Scale. Uniform Scale is just a scale factor that's added on top of this scale factor that you adjust here, but it does it in all three dimensions, x, y, and z, uniformly and simultaneously, so you don't have to adjust it in three different places. Also, instead of having to come in here and actually type in what value we might want, we have a slider that we can use to make that adjustment dynamically on the fly. Problem is our slider kind of limits the amount of detail that we can get. Like I don't have these finite adjustments that I might want to make sure that the car is fitting directly in the box. I'll get it pretty close here. And since I'm in my view tool, I have my camera selected, I'm going to go ahead and tap A on the keyboard while hovering over the scene view. That'll zoom in all of the geometry I'm working with. And I want to show you a quick way of getting a little bit finer detail when you're working inside of the parameter view. Just like we have the option of right-clicking on any of these and setting them back to their defaults with Revert to Defaults, Houdini gives a very interesting way of adjusting these values, and it's called the value ladder. Now, the value ladder is accessible by middle mouse clicking either on the name of the parameter or in any one of the single values that you have to adjust. So I'm just going to zoom out using my mouse wheel now to zoom out a little bit so we can see a little bit more of the car. If I wanted to scale the car down in X only, I can just middle click right here inside of this parameter for the X scale, and I get this pop-up that is, we call it the value ladder. Now by default, your mouse is resting right in the middle, which is 0.1. Above that, things grow in 10% increments. So we have, if we times 0.1 times 10, we have 1. 1 times 10 is 10. 10 times 10 is 100. And the same thing in diminishing values to get smaller and smaller. Now all of this is I'm holding down the middle mouse button still. Now I can pick one of these values that I want to be able to change, and there I just did a little bit by accident. If I scroll now to the right, that value is increasing by 0.1 increments. So in other words, the value was 1, and now I can change it to 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. I can take it back to just 1, so that's where the defaults were. I can come up this way and I can change it by tens, so instead of being 1, now it'll pop automatically to 20, or 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, so huge increment adjustments. And I also have the ability to make very tiny, micro-sized adjustments. You can just barely see it moving here by coming down on the value ladder all the way down to the 0.00001 or thousandths adjustment. So now I've got a little bit different value here in scale. I'm just going to right-click, and we'll use our little trick to Revert to Defaults. And I want to use the Uniform Scale. So in order to focus in on the right thing here, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit on the box that we're a target box for the shape of the car. I'm going to middle click on the word Uniform Scale here, hold down middle click, and slowly drag to the left. Now that'll get me pretty close here. In fact, that's very close. The wheels are outside the box just a little bit here. If I want to get a better view of that, I can actually hide my grid and view from the top down. Again, we can get there by using this yellow drop down. I'm either going to set view to top viewport or using the keyboard shortcut spacebar and 2. So now I can see the box and I can see the car at the same time, and I can see that the wheels are just about in the right spot, but I think the fenders are coming out just a little bit, so I just want to move those down just barely so they fit inside of that box. Now, to do that, I'm going to use the Uniform Scale and the Value Ladder. So I'm going to middle click here on Uniform Scale and come down into the thousandths area, and now I can drag right and left until I have very, very, very precise control, and I can just get those fenders to rest inside of the shape of the bounding box that we want to fit. I'm going to return to my perspective view, this time using the shortcut of spacebar and 1. Now I can see that my car's width is about right, and the positions, so the positions in X and Z are correct, but it's sitting above a little bit in the Y. For this, I'm going to make sure that I'm on the transform node and translate it down in Y. So again, hovering over this X, Y, and Z, hovering over the Y parameter here, middle click, hold down middle click. I'm going to drag down to about the tenths, scroll to my left, and scoot that car down until it fits just inside of the box. And now with the car firmly fitted inside of the box, I can see that everything is about right. It looks like the fin here, the spoiler on the car, is sticking out just a little bit, but we can adjust that. In fact, in the next lesson, that's what we're going to look at doing.